Dear learners, I'm Christina Georgy, your academic counselor for the course code MEG 5, which is titled Literary Criticism and Theory. Before moving further, let me clarify that this is a specialized session specifically designed for the MEG learners. Hence, all the aspects discussed here will be solely based on or limited to the prescribed study material or syllabus for the same. As per the requests of our learners, I'll be recording this session.
In the previous session, we discussed Sigmund Freud and some of the main ideas put forth by Sigmund Freud. Now, we'll focus our attention towards Jacques Lacan and some of his most notable ideas and concepts. So earlier, I helped you with this understanding that Lacan offered a rereading of Sigmund Freud's theories, that too in the light of linguistics. Never forget that he reread Freud in the light of linguistics. That is the extra addition that Lacan brought into his reading of psychoanalysis. So in the 1950s and 1960s, Lacan developed a structuralist theory of psychoanalysis. What did he develop? He developed a structuralist theory of psychoanalysis. Interestingly, this theory was largely based on the work of Ferdinand de Saussure. Who's Saussure? You must be knowing him. He is one of the most notable Swiss linguists. When we study structuralism, we always mention Ferdinand de Saussure. One suggestion: never write the wrong spelling for Saussure. So if you are not confident enough to write Ferdinand de Saussure, the full name, you may write the last name. That is yet another mistake that constantly repeats. See, according to the Western notion, it is the surname that is important. If you wrote just Ferdinand, how would we know whether it is this Ferdinand or some other Ferdinand? But if you wrote Saussure, it would be understood that, oh, you would be referring to this Ferdinand de Saussure. So always write, he is a Swiss linguist. That is yet another suggestion. When you write answers for your TEE, try to elaborate on this particular name. Instead of just writing Ferdinand de Saussure, you may write the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure as if an elaboration into what you mean or what does he mean to the society of literature in general. So here the important thing to note in this connection is that Lacan did not import a stable linguistic theory into psychoanalysis. So that would be a wrong conception if you felt like he brought in a linguistic theory into psychoanalysis. But you need to know that his goal was that the encounter between Freud and Saussure should lead to a rethinking of the work of both thinkers in the light of the other person's work. That is, by combining Freud and Saussure and their outputs, he tried to rethink. He tried to bring in something new. It's more like, in colloquial terms, we can say a mixture, the best of the both worlds kind of idea. Now, regarding the unconscious, we already discussed Freud and his concept of unconscious. Now moving on to Lacan's theory. One of Lacan's famous utterances is that the unconscious is structured like a language. By this he means that the unconscious used linguistic means of self-expression, and that the unconscious is an orderly network, as complex as the structure of language. That is, he means that the unconscious used linguistic means of self-expression, and that it is an orderly network, and that it is very complex as the structure of language. This is how he built connection between psychoanalysis and linguistics. According to him, the subject is seen as an effect of language in that its position and identity is constituted by language. Language has significance here. That is, a subject's position and identity is constituted by language. You need to understand that language mostly names that which is not present and substitutes a linguistic sign for it when the child starts entering the language system. That is regarding the child's initial take-up of language. This would be very much important. Now, Lacan has mentioned 3 cognitive dimensions. We can say that 3 orders are quite central to Lacan's thoughts. These are distinctions developed by him, whom Lacan, to describe the phases in the constitution of the psychic subject. What do you mean by the psychic subject? This is the technical term they use in psychoanalysis. Like the subject, the individual and his psyche, that's all. Yes. So which are these 3 orders according to Jacques Lacan? They include the imaginary, the symbolic and the real. You need to number these and study or else you will forget. The imaginary, the symbolic and the real. So now I'll help you elaborate on these concepts. That is, the imaginary is the dimension in which there is no clear distinction between the subject and the object. Whereas the symbolic is a realm of language. It sets off the subject on a quest for the unobtainable lost object. Just remember, it is a realm of language. Then the real is beyond language. Hence, it is a realm of the impossible. Symbolic is the realm of language, whereas the real is a realm of the impossible. Dear, there are quite a lot of interpretations and explanation for these dimensions, but I'll stick on to what is mentioned in your study material because IGNOU intends you to have just the basic idea of these 3 dimensions. Hence, I don't think it would be ideal for me to provide more explanations on this considering the time restrictions of our academic counseling sessions. So just remember these 3 dimensions, and as you know, there won't be any short questions for MEG 5. So if at all they ask you a question from this block, I mean this particular unit, the question will be to elaborate on the contributions of Lacan or Freud towards the field of psychoanalysis. There could be a separate question on either of these 2 critics or a general question based on these 2 significant figures in psychoanalysis combined. Now, our study material provides explanation regarding those 2 concepts of lack and gap. According to Lacan, he introduces these ideas of lack and gap into the operations of the subject. That is the other. Okay? How the other feels this lack and gap. The subject can only be the unstable effect of meaning, never its master. That is the stigmatization there. In its otherness, in its exclusion from the imaginary, it is the cause of the lack which initiates desire. It is the lack that initiates a desire. So desire is that which begins to take shape in the margin in which demand becomes separated from need. If you remember, we saw in this glossary keywords that desire is the gap between demand for love and the appetite for satisfaction. It is the same thing that is mentioned here. Another thing to note in this context is that the phallus for Lacan is a signifier of lack, not an actual organ. It stands for the law of the father and the fear of castration. It is experienced as separation and loss in relation to the maternal body. I also explained this when I explained Freud. So I hope you got an idea. Let's not repeat the same thing. So as Lacan sees the symbolic order, the power of law is about the power to establish relationship through speech and through act of naming. The dominant figure of the father is conceived as an abstraction of the parental role, which is characterized by privileged possession of the mother. So when the male child himself identifies with the father's role, his position is that having been forced to give up his claim to the mother, he receives in exchange his own claim to a place within the order of language and culture. So, in a way, we can say that psychoanalysis, after analyzing the major contributions of both Freud and Lacan, has been immensely helpful in an understanding of works of the literary parlance. So, if you look at section 3.5, the impact of psychoanalysis in your textbook, you can understand that works such as Shakespeare's Hamlet and D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers can be read in the light of psychoanalysis criticism. That is, we already discussed Hamlet. How does that apply in Hamlet? Any idea? How does psychoanalytic criticism apply in Hamlet? So Freud's theory of Oedipus Complex, as I mentioned when we discussed Oedipus Complex, is demonstrated in his analysis of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So Freud himself has analyzed Shakespeare's Hamlet. So Oedipus Complex is the strong affinity that the infant, the male child, develops for his mother. So in case of Prince Hamlet, throughout the play, he ponders over and procrastinates the task of killing Claudius. Who's Claudius? The present husband of his mother. Remember? Yes. He wanted to kill Claudius in order to avenge his father's murder. So, if you have studied Hamartia, I think I taught you Hamartia. Yes, Hamartia refers to the tragic flow, right? So, if you refer to Hamlet, the tragic flow is none other than... I gave you a chance to respond. When you write for TEE, take care of the spelling. The tragic flow of Hamlet is procrastination. Okay, that is this thought of to do or not do. Yeah, to do or not to do. That feeling is procrastination. So, Freud proposes that Hamlet is unable to make up his mind to kill Claudius owing to his own Oedipus complex. That is the repressed but continuing presence in the adult's unconscious, in Hamlet's unconscious, of his desire to possess his mother and do away with his rival, that is the father. So Freud derived the term from Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. I already mentioned this when we discussed Sigmund Freud in detail. So Freud links Hamlet's situation to Shakespeare himself, as the play was written immediately after the death of Shakespeare's father in 1601. I'm not sure whether you were aware of this fact. Also, Shakespeare's son, who died at an early age, bore the name Hamnet. See, it's very similar to Hamlet, Hamnet. So Freud's view on Hamlet were later taken up by another writer, Ernest Jones, in his work Hamlet and Oedipus, published in 1949. Yes, that would do as if an explanation. Now, another important aspect to remember is the feminist critique of Freud. So that is mentioned as second paragraph in section 3.5. A number of feminist critiques find Freud's and Lacan's idea problematic. There is a biologism in Freud's theories, they argue. On a detailed understanding, we get to know that Freud has been widely discredited by some early second wave feminists. If you have studied feminism, you would have clarity in this section. Some of the second wave feminists, including Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, etc. So, Millett in particular argued that Freudian theory worked to perpetuate sexual difference and reinforce the belief that inferiority was an inherent quality of the female. His discussions on sexuality referred almost entirely to men and considered women in negative terms. Which are those negative terms? As lacking the other and as having penis envy. That is, the females have penis envy. That's what he mentioned. And all this negativity reduced female development to a frustrated desire for masculinity. So if you look into your textbook, it has been mentioned that what has been seen as especially objectionable is that Freudian notion that women, on account of suffering from penis envy and castration complex, get defined negatively in relation to a male norm. That is, the male was considered normal and the female was considered other. So all those were objections put forth by the feminists of those times against these psychoanalyst critics. So in this particular session, we discussed Lacan and some of the major contributions and ideas put forth by him regarding unconscious, regarding the three orders such as imaginary, symbolic, real in precise manner. And we also referred to some of the key terminology: lack, gap, the other, desire, etc. We looked at how Shakespeare's Hamlet was read by Freud. Yet another example for this Oedipus complex is D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. If you are interested, you may refer to that. And we also discussed the feminist criticism against Freud and Lacan. So in short, we can say that both Freud and Lacan are concerned with identity, growth, sexuality, and with psychoanalysis as a form of therapy. Speaking about Freud, he sees the ego, the id, and the superego as the three psychic zones. They deal with pleasure, reality, and morality. So a quick mention regarding Oedipus complex. This is important. That is why I am constantly repeating. Thank you, everybody. I saw those answers. So I hope those who are not texting are also listening. At least study when you get time. Okay. So the Oedipus complex related to what the child makes of paternal authority and with the way in which he sees his father as an obstacle is also quite crucial to the study of Freud. Now comes dreams, interpretation of dreams. Moving on to Lacan, the unconscious is crucial to his thoughts. One important thing to remember is that Lacan adds a linguistic dimension to Freud's insights. He provided a rereading of Freud plus linguistics. Just keep that in mind. So Lacan's main contribution has been in spelling out notions like lack, desire, otherness, etc. And as I said, modernist texts such as James Joyce's Artist, that is a portrait of the artist as a young man, and T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock offer good examples of how some of these things actually work in literature. So if you get time, spend some time into reading these examples so that you get clarity regarding the theory that we have studied. So on that note, let's wind up this particular session on psychoanalysis. In our next session, we'll discuss the beginnings of cultural studies and new historicism. So thank you so much for joining me.